Tonight, war in Europe.
Our worst fears have now come true, and all our warnings have proved tragically accurate.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
Russia's lightning invasion of Ukraine at dawn has shocked the world.
It's worse than we expected. My hometown in Western Ukraine, that was the safest place, already had explosions today.
So how did we get here, and what happens next? We'll be live with the very latest in Kyiv and Moscow and have top analysis from ITV's correspondents and experts with everything you need to know. What will be the response back home? Will British forces be involved in conflict? And with shockwaves too through the global economy, we hear warnings this could hit all of us in the pocket.
We are already before this in a cost of living crisis. Already at the petrol pumps, we're seeing prices at new records.
Well, good evening and welcome to this special edition of the Tonight programme on a day Ukraine and the West hoped would never come. After weeks of diplomacy, which were in the end hopeless, before dawn this morning, President Putin unleashed a full-scale invasion by land, sea and air. Not since the end of the Second World War has Europe seen a darker day. A siren sounded, missiles rained down on Ukrainian military targets. There have been dozens of civilian and military casualties. In its big cities, families scrambled to pack their bags and head to basements. Roads out of the capital, Kyiv, were jammed as they tried to get out, as the Russian military now advances on the capital. Well, this is Kyiv tonight, as another dark night awaits. Here in the UK, condemnation has been swift. The Prime Minister called President Putin a blood-stained aggressor and ramped up sanctions, promising that nothing is off the table. President Biden said the decision to invade Ukraine would cost Russia dearly. Well, tonight we'll examine how we got here and where we go next. James Mate is in Kyiv. Neil Connery is in Moscow, and for the programme here in the studio, I'm joined by our US correspondent, Robert Moore. Let's speak first, though, to James in Kyiv tonight. James, what is happening there as darkness has fallen and so much dread must be there in the capital?
There certainly is. It is quiet right now, perhaps ominously quiet. This is what we saw just a few minutes ago, anti-aircraft fire arcing up into the sky. There have been regular the noise of jets above us. It's no way of knowing whether they are Russian or Ukrainian or who controls the skies here now. Sirens go off periodically, as they did in the early hours of this morning. We were woken by them and the noise of explosions right across the horizon here. There followed the armoured advance from the north, from the east and from the south from Crimea as armoured columns rolled into Ukraine. There was then the assault on the airfield just 15-20 miles away from here, a battle we understand which is still going on and which may be crucial in terms of whether the Russians can attack Kiev directly. By the end of today, Chernobyl, having been fought over, the nuclear power station had fallen. Its condition isn't known. This isn't the end of it, not by any means.
James, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. And just to hear the word Chernobyl in the context of this conversation, Robert, is horrifying in itself, isn't it? This is not a war in a far-flung country. It's just a short flight from here. It is hard to overstate what a moment this is.
This is, Julie, a deeply shocking day. The very security architecture in Europe that has kept the peace since 1945 tonight is in grave peril. But it's more than just shocking. It's also deeply perplexing. The broad analysis of Vladimir Putin was that he was manipulative, ruthless, deeply cynical, but nevertheless a rational actor. And yet what is happening now appears to be a mix of sort of irrationality and even paranoia. He's endangering the Russian economy. He's isolated the Kremlin diplomatically. And most importantly, he has ensured the enmity of Ukrainians towards Moscow for a generation. So it is fair to say that for many, this is not just a provocative and incendiary step, it is also inexplicable.
OK, Robert, thank you for the moment for that. And I know that we now have some more background to this from Robert. How did it come to this? It's been a day when President Putin has revealed his utter disdain and disregard for diplomacy and international law in the sight of the whole world. But have these terrible scenes been decades in the making? And were the warning signs ignored for too long?
These are the images that stunned Western leaders today. Armed conflict erupting in the heart of Europe. Russian military convoys rolling across a European border. And Ukrainian cities under military siege. They are scenes that Europeans hoped had been consigned to a dark and increasingly distant past. But the reality is now stark. Western Europe confronts a Russian leader who is pursuing a foreign policy that is deeply confrontational. Some say even paranoid. Putin also delivered an apocalyptic warning to the West not to interfere. His aim is to create, by force, a buffer zone, a client state, irrespective of the human cost. Vladimir Putin has weaved an entirely false narrative, projecting Ukraine as a threat, as a country in the grip of anti-Russian extremists. In truth, Russia and Ukraine have a long and complicated relationship. But above all, they share deep historical links, bonds of families and of heritage, making this attack all the more shocking, a true betrayal. Ever since Ukraine broke away from the imploding USSR and became independent, Moscow tried to keep the country in its orbit. Impossible after the 2014 Maidan Revolution that ousted a pro-Russian leader. Ukraine's increasingly Western orientation and its desire to join NATO aroused deep resentment in the Kremlin.
So this is the point that President Putin has been preparing for since he first arrived in power, wanting to rebuild Moscow's domain, rebuild that power over the countries beyond its borders, which he thinks is Russia's historical birthright.
What has emboldened President Putin is his 20-year creation of a formidable Russian military, now able to project power and deliver on the Kremlin's belligerent foreign policy. Perhaps the most frightening dimension is unspoken. Putin came to power 22 years ago on the back of a brutal campaign to subjugate Chechnya, a war that left the capital Grozny in ruins. Could such ruthless disregard for life be Putin's calling card once more, this time in Ukraine?
And that is such a huge question which hangs over everything tonight, Robert, doesn't it? Is that, trying to work out what Putin's end game is here, even in these early hours, it's hard to develop strategy if you can't really second guess where he's aiming.
This may not be shock and awe. It may be about incremental moves. It may be about strangulation. We don't have access to Putin's battle plan. We don't have access to his kind of inner thinking, and we have to kind of accept that. This could be day one of a conflict that lasts for weeks, months, or even we could have a grinding conflict in the heart of Europe for years. And, it could have spillover to many of Russia's other fault lines. Think of the Baltics or the Caucasus or Central Asia. Strategic stability always depended on having this sort of rational actor in the Kremlin. We now have somebody who we don't understand and who may be duly contemptuous of the very measures we're using to try and contain him.
OK, for the moment, Robert, thank you very much indeed. For that, we'll be back to you again later. Well, families in Ukraine tonight are making life and death decisions, whether to flee or whether to stay. Miles and miles of traffic jams have been heading out of the capital, Kyiv. Others are sheltering in basements and churches. Long queues have formed at banks and supermarkets and pharmacies. And a short time ago, I spoke to Rostok Chaikivsky in Lviv in western Ukraine. He's gathered his family together, his mother, his sister, his wife and their young daughter. Their bags are packed. They may be getting ready to hide in the basement tonight. On his phone, he told me he'll do all he can to save his family.
It was a really stressful morning, but yeah, everybody will react as humans. Children don't understand what's going on. Older people really panicking, and we who are those who can do some impact on the situation, we try to stay calm as much as we can because we care, and we are not scared at all.
How might you have to explain this to your little girl? How will you talk to her about this?
We are responsible to inform her that what we are preparing, why we are preparing, that bad guys are coming and are good guys fighting them back, but we need to be prepared.
Just take me through the preparations that you made then this morning, the practicalities with documents and, I don't know, food supplies. What were you doing? Just give me a sense of what you had to put in place today and what you're still doing.
With you, we have lists of those things, like what we can get in the car, and in case we can't use the car and leave the city by foot, what minimum we should take with us and bring it on ourselves. I've been today in the line to the gas station for about an hour and a half just to get enough fuel, and other people are in lines at the ATMs or pharmacies.
What would it mean to you to have to flee? Poland isn't very far away from Lviv, is it? You could make plans to go there. Where are you thinking, and what is your thinking on that at the moment?
If it's not hiding in a basement, but move somewhere safe, we would move our families, our women and children, somewhere to the villages near Lviv, which is safer, and then come back and fight.
And are you able to fight? Are you ready to fight, Rostok?
Yeah, in the end, if needed, I'm ready to take a weapon. But first of all, I'm ready to volunteer and stay to the end with our military and everybody who's fighting for our country.
And if you had a message for President Putin, Rostok, what would it be?
I don't believe there is a message I can tell him and he will stop. He understands only power, and I hope our country will be the last point he will try to achieve, and we will beat him, and then he will stop.
Rostok, thank you so much for giving us your time, and we're sending you all our best wishes and hope that you will be safe and that there will be peace.
Thank you very much.
Voice from Lviv, speaking to me a little earlier. Rostok, we're very grateful for him talking to us. Well, here in the UK, the Ukrainian community are watching in horror at what is unfolding in their homeland. They're also watching and waiting to see how the UK will act next. This evening, the PM announced the largest ever set of sanctions against Russia. In a heated meeting, the Foreign Secretary told the Russian ambassador to his face that he should be ashamed of himself. And although at this point there is no plan for British troops to be involved, the impact of Putin's action will be felt by all of us straight away. It sparked a global crash in the markets and a rocketing rise in the price of oil and gas, with prices already up at the pumps. The talk of war in Europe feels daunting, especially for the families of Ukrainians living here in the UK.
It's worse than we expected. My hometown in western Ukraine, that was the safest place, already had explosions today.
Throughout the day, Ukrainians have been protesting outside Downing Street, calling on the government to do more.
I feel betrayed because I've been on the streets of London for 8 years. We were talking about this for 8 years. The Putin needs to be stopped when he invaded Ukraine back in 2014.
The response from inside Number 10, at least for now, is not troops on the ground, But if anyone thinks this is a crisis far away, experts warn they're deeply mistaken.
I don't think there's any doubt that Britain's got a foot in this crisis one way or another. So to sort of sit on the fringes of Europe and think this has nothing to do with us because it's the other end of the continent, I think is misguided.
Britain's focus is economic sanctions. Earlier this week, there was heavy criticism.
Are you going to toughen up sanctions, Prime Minister?
Even from Boris Johnson's own side, that the response was too late and too weak.
Should it not be that we need to hit them if we're going to hit them with sanctions hard and hit them now?
In the last few hours, the Prime Minister has announced what he describes as the largest and most severe package of economic sanctions Russia has ever seen.
For this, Putin will stand condemned in the eyes of the world and of history. Now we see him for what he is, a blood-stained aggressor who believes in imperial conquest.
But whatever direction the UK takes, this crisis is already having deep ramifications to our economy. Within hours of troops entering Ukraine, the stock markets plummeted and fuel prices rocketed.
This is likely to see a huge increase in wholesale gas prices. We've seen a spike today. You're likely to see the oil price rise, and again over the last few days that has increased to unprecedented levels, which is why already at the petrol pumps we're seeing prices at new records.
There's a huge level of uncertainty, and this at a time when families are already feeling the squeeze.
We are already before this in a cost of living crisis. Now look, the most important thing is we hope that this conflict is resolved and there's limited loss of life. We also have to hope economically that it is resolved, because this is not going to make anything better.
Putin's invasion of Ukraine may be more than 1,000 miles away, but it is likely every single one of us will be affected. Well, we're joined now by Lord Dannatt, the former Chief of the British Armed Forces, and very grateful for your time this evening. Such a shocking thought that President Putin has brought war back to Europe in the 21st century. Lord Dannatt, how does the West respond, in your view?
Well, Julie, you're absolutely right, and everyone is absolutely right. This is the blackest day in European history since 1945. Frankly, we thought that state-on-state conflict had ended in the middle of the 20th century, and to come back this century is quite disgraceful. Now, Vladimir Putin may well think that he's achieving something rather special, rather remarkable for the Russian people by ordering the invasion of Ukraine. But we absolutely have to convince everybody that this is the first day of the end of Vladimir Putin. The majority of his people, if they really knew what was going on in Ukraine, the majority of the Russian people would no longer be supporting Vladimir Putin. It is disgraceful what he is doing, and he has brought war back to Europe in a way that frankly is unthinkable in this generation. He should be ashamed of himself. He has become a monster in history, and he has made his country a pariah in the world. We have to bring the heaviest possible sanctions onto them and the greatest isolation of Russia at this moment in time.
But we've seen, Lord Dannatt, that the sanctions or the threat of sanctions or even the sanctions that he's suffered in the past seem to have made no difference in this situation. There'll be many British families wondering tonight whether British forces at some point will have to be involved here. We know what the scope of NATO by strict rules is, but what is the scope potentially for British forces?
As things stand, with Ukraine not being a NATO member, there is no prospect of British armed forces being deployed into Ukraine. Of course, we are very likely to increase the support to other allied NATO members that have a common border with Russia, the Baltic states and Poland in particular. But we've got to be in no doubt at all that every possible economic sanction that the brightest minds could dream up have got to be applied to Russia. The greatest isolation possible has got to be applied to Russia in diplomatic and international terms. Vladimir Putin has absolutely got to be made to realize he has made a strategic error of huge proportions. Now, this is going to hurt everyone. It's going to hurt the British economy, it's going to hurt the European economy, and particularly it's going to hurt the Russian economy. And I would anticipate that over a period of time, Russian people, as their living standards go down, will increasingly say to themselves, we've got a lunatic who's now heading our country. We've got to get rid of him and get our country back into a position of good governance. That's what
just very
they need to
briefly, Lord
realise.
Dannett, if I may, apparently President Biden has been briefed on cyber warfare options tonight. What could the scope of those be?
Well, they will be considerable. We've already seen a major attack in the past, cyber attack in the past on Estonia. And we just know that it doesn't take many determined people of a malignant, malicious nature to bring huge cyber negative effects on British businesses, on international businesses, on international governments. We've got to be braced for all kinds of attacks. But that should not allow us to flinch in our determination to face down Vladimir Putin, who has shown himself to be a crook, a villain of the first order. I'm afraid this is a bad day for Vladimir Putin, and he's going to have to be made to pay frankly, with everything.
Lord Dannett, we're grateful for your time this evening. Thank you very much indeed. We can cross now to Moscow and join ITV News' Neil Connery, who's there for us tonight. You've been speaking to people in Russia today. What response have you found? How much do they even know about what's happening in Ukraine, Neil?
Julie, what's interesting is that state TV is the main source of news for many Russians, and the way they've been covering this story today has all been about the Donbass, those two self-proclaimed republics in the east of Ukraine. What viewers aren't seeing on Russian state TV is the enormity of the whole of what is happening in Ukraine. Now, Russians I've been speaking to today have expressed their fears, their anxiety about what this all means, the impact on their everyday lives, the effect of sanctions. Others I've talked to have expressed their support for what President Putin is doing here. What's interesting as well, we've had a number of anti-war protests taking place in Moscow and in St. Petersburg as well during the day. The Kremlin insists that it does have the support of the Russian people. But, you know, ultimately, what the Russian people think or feel here is not going to change anything. It is really those around President Putin, the elite in this country. How will they respond to sanctions is the question people are asking.
Neil, thank you very much indeed for that. Just a couple of hours ahead of us. Of course, there'll be families in Ukraine tonight who know they will get little sleep tonight as their worst fears came true today. Let's return to Kyiv and James, and a dark day for Europe indeed, James.
Yeah, absolutely. What President Putin is trying to do is nothing less than tear up the post-Cold War settlement to re-establish a Russian empire and to re-establish a sphere of influence beyond that empire, which of course would include countries who are now members of NATO, which is why this is such a challenge to NATO and to the West. No one cares more than Ukrainians that the West, Europe and the United States is up to facing this challenge and is strong enough to get President Putin to back down, because if not, they may be lost. But I think many of them will fear today, after the West still apparently holding back on sanctions, still trying to save something in reserve in case things get even worse, that maybe Europe and the United States are not going to be up to it.
James, thank you for that. And a final thought now from Robert. The world has changed today, quite simply, hasn't it? And it's a profoundly disturbing moment.
It is. I mean, the whole basis of kind of Western foreign policy for a decade has been the so-called kind of Asian pivot, that our biggest challenge was to try and contain an assertive and ascendant China. But suddenly, you know, as of this morning, dawn this morning, we are now looking at trying to contain an imperialist Russia. And one of the great ironies of this story is it may be that China, not even a party to this conflict, is the ultimate victor, with Europe and the US once again preoccupied with Europe.
Indeed, and it is just the first day. Robert, thank you very much indeed for all your insight this evening. And that is where we leave it this evening from the Tonight programme, as the world gets to grips with a new reality. In Moscow and across Russia, there will be many wondering what their president has unleashed. In Washington, the big question: can President Biden galvanise the world to act? Has he a plan? And in Kyiv tonight, there must be dread at what the hours and days ahead could bring. Our thoughts are with everyone there. Tom will be here with news at 10, but from all of us on Tonight, good evening and thanks for watching.